You'll get nothing. You're nothing without me. Richard's smug smirk was the first thing to die the moment Eleanor Vance stepped into the room. The conference room was thick with arrogance, suffocating under decades of dismissive looks and whispered insults directed at me. Richard, my husband for 40 years, sat back in his chair like a king secure in his throne, his lips curled into a cruel, self-satisfied smile. For weeks, months even, since I dared speak the word divorce, he'd belittled me with relentless contempt. Just a housewife, he sneered, voice dripping with disdain. No judge will take you seriously. He said I'd lose the divorce because I was just a housewife, until he saw the top lawyer by my side. Beside him, his lawyer Henderson clutched a pitiful lowball offer meant to scare me back into my gilded cage. Richard caught my eye as I entered and shook his head pityingly, as if I were a foolish child making a terrible mistake. Then Eleanor Vance arrived, impeccably dressed, radiating quiet power and unshakable intelligence, carrying an air of authority that instantly silenced the room. Known in legal circles as the matriarch's mace, she was famous for defending women everyone else had written off. The moment Eleanor stepped in, Richard's smugness crumbled. His face fell, his jaw slackened, and Henderson fumbled, dropping his pen onto the polished table with a harsh clatter. Eleanor's voice cut through the heavy tension, calm, commanding, and absolute. She was there to represent me. That was the turning point. The moment Richard realized the little housewife he'd mocked was no longer a joke. She was the storm coming to dismantle his world, piece by ruthless piece. I thought of all the birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, moments I had hoped would bring us together, that had quietly slipped away, overshadowed by indifference. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had been invisible, forgotten by the very people I had dedicated my life to. Yet beneath the heartbreak, something fierce and unbreakable began to rise, a quiet strength forged from years of endurance. I was not going to vanish quietly into the shadows. If they thought I would simply disappear, they were gravely mistaken. That night marked not an end, but a beginning. A resolve took root deep within me to reclaim my dignity, to fight for the respect I deserved. I would no longer be the forgotten woman, silenced and sidelined. I would stand tall, confront the lies, and rebuild my life on my own terms. The path ahead was uncertain and daunting, but I was no longer the frightened, sidelined wife. I was a woman reborn from the ashes of betrayal, ready to face whatever came next with courage, clarity, and unwavering determination. But to understand how we reached that defining moment, we have to go back to a day that should have been joyful, my 60th birthday. That morning, I woke with a flutter of hope. 60 felt like a milestone worth remembering, even though in all the years before, no one had ever truly celebrated it. 2 weeks prior, while helping my grandson tidy his desk, I had found a handmade card, scribbled in crayon, "Happy birthday, Grandma." I'd hidden it away, but it gave me a quiet hope that this year might be different. I spent the entire day cleaning the house from top to bottom until every surface gleamed and the sharp scent of lemon polish filled the air, a testament to the effort I poured into preparing for the evening. After lunch, I treated myself to a long, hot shower, a rare indulgence these days, and even curled my hair for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Pulling on my best navy blue dress, the one Richard had once complimented by saying it made my eyes sparkle like sapphires, I settled into the living room, with my hands folded neatly in my lap, quietly waiting for the family to return so we could celebrate together. As the day wore on, and evening slowly crept in, a creeping sense of unease began to gnaw at me. In the flurry of preparation, I had forgotten to ask where we were going for dinner. Hoping to find out, I sent text messages to my son Brian, my daughter-in-law Emily, and Richard himself, but none replied. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, pressing down on me as if it were a physical weight that refused to lift. Restlessness took hold. I found myself pacing upstairs, tidying the bedroom and closet, fussing over things that were already perfectly arranged. Each fold of a sweater, each dusting of the shelves, was a nervous attempt to distract myself from the growing knot of dread tightening in my chest. Eventually, exhaustion seeped in, a deep weariness settling into my bones. I leaned against the sofa in the bedroom, just for a moment, and before I knew it, sleep claimed me. When I awoke, the world outside had surrendered to darkness. Panic rose swiftly, a rising tide of fear flooding my heart. Had they already left for the restaurant without me? The thought was unbearable. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I prepared to call, desperate to hear their voices, but all I saw were the messages I had sent earlier. No replies, no missed calls, nothing but a deafening silence. With a trembling hand, I dialed Richard's number. The moment he answered, his tone struck me, impatient and distant, as if he were speaking to an unwelcome interruption rather than the woman who had shared his life for 40 years. "Hello," he said flatly. "Richard, it's me." I began hesitantly, the lump in my throat making each word a struggle. Before I could say more, he cut me off. "What is it, May? Can this wait? We're a bit busy." His voice was clipped, dismissive, like I was an inconvenience rather than his wife. I was wondering where we are having dinner tonight," I stammered. "We're out," he replied curtly. "Just eat something at home, or we can bring you something back if there are leftovers." Leftovers. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. My 60th birthday, reduced to leftovers. I felt numb, the sting of that cruel dismissal wrapping around me like a shroud. I was about to say, "But Richard, today is," when a bright, familiar voice interrupted from the other end of the line. "Richard, darling, come cut the cake. Everyone's waiting." It was Lucy Wells, her voice sugary sweet and far too close to the phone. The realization that she was there, celebrating instead of me, made my blood run cold. Richard's tone grew hurried and dismissive. "If it's nothing urgent, May, let's talk later." The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with the echo of a celebration that wasn't mine, a birthday ignored and forgotten. I sat there in the dark, the navy blue dress suddenly feeling like a costume in a play no one had bothered to attend. Outside, thunder rumbled, a fitting soundtrack for the crushing loneliness settling deep within me. Leftovers. My 60th birthday. The sting of those words numbed me. Before I could protest, a woman's voice interrupted, a voice I knew all too well. Lucy Wells, the ghost of Richard's past, who never truly left his life. Suddenly, the call ended. I sat in the dark, the navy dress suddenly feeling like a costume no one cared to see. Outside, thunder rumbled, a fitting soundtrack to the crushing loneliness. On social media, I found a video. There they were, Richard, Brian, Emily, and my grandson Jack, gathered around a lavish cake, singing to Lucy, their faces lit with joy and laughter. The caption read, "A warm birthday night with my loved ones. So blessed." I played it again and again, the joyful voices piercing my heart. Jack's voice called out, "Happy birthday, Grandma Lucy." Not me, never me. In the video, a menu from Le Rendezvous, an upscale restaurant Richard frequented for business dinners, a place too fussy for family dinners, lay casually on the table. Tears blurred my vision, and harsh sobs racked my body in the empty house. 40 years of devotion, sacrifice, and love thrown aside, while another woman received the celebration I never did. Fury surged through the grief. I grabbed my purse and keys, hailed a cab, and barked at the driver to hurry downtown. At the restaurant, I saw them, Richard and Lucy hand in hand, Jack skipping happily between them. Brian and Emily followed, smiles masking the betrayal. Richard's panic flickered and vanished behind cold composure. His voice was sharp with reproach as he asked what I was doing there. Lucy, radiant and composed, greeted me with fake kindness, spinning lies about Richard and Jack celebrating her birthday and me staying home sick. Jack, my own grandson, suddenly ran toward me, not with affection, but with scorn, shouting cruel words I never imagined from a child. "What are you doing here, you old uneducated village woman? Go away!" Emily's scolding fell flat as Jack screamed that I wasn't his grandma, that Grandma Lucy was, and that I wasn't like them. Frozen, my fury and humiliation exploded. I grabbed Jack's arm and struck him. A firm slap, not a beating. His wails drew stares. Emily stood stunned, and Brian shoved me aside, furious. The three shielded Brian, condemning me as a lunatic. I stared back coldly, filled with a fury that stunned even myself. My voice cut through like glass, calling them ungrateful, blind, and selfish. Brian stammered, but Richard's icy voice dismissed me as irrational and hysterical, telling me I was embarrassing the family. I laughed bitterly, pausing before declaring sharply that I was not almost 60 but exactly 60 that day. The storm inside me roared with unyielding power, the culmination of years of neglect, betrayal, and the crushing realization that the family I had devoted my life to had forgotten me completely. And with that, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving them all behind, gaping in the garage, without so much as a backward glance. When I got to our bedroom, I locked the door behind me. I took off my dress, the navy blue dress, and let it fall to the floor. I stood under a hot shower, scrubbing my face, my skin, but no amount of water could wash away the heaviness, the poison, pressing on my chest. Ever since my husband passed away, about 10 years now, Richard has spent nearly every birthday with me. After Jack was born, Brian and Emily would come too. It's become a little tradition. Reading that message, the fire that had been burning so fiercely inside me just went out, like someone had pulled all the oxygen from the room. It didn't even turn to smoke, just cold, lifeless ash. I felt ridiculous, pathetic. I almost laughed, a hollow, broken sound. My husband had been celebrating his ex-girlfriend's birthday with our son and his family for 10 straight years. My son had been joining them for 7 of those years. Me? I had been part of this family for 40 years, and not once had anyone remembered my birthday with anything more than a passing, "Oh, is it today?" if they remembered at all. I thought back to when I was younger, before marriage. Every year on my birthday, my parents, bless their hard-working souls, would cook me a warm bowl of pasta and make hot cocoa, sometimes with a few precious candies placed gently on the side of the bowl. Simple gestures, but they made me feel seen, cherished. My father worked the night shift at the factory. My mother was a cook in the hospital cafeteria. They were exhausted every single day, but they never let a birthday go unnoticed. Not mine, not my sister's. No. In this so-called family, even a simple happy birthday felt like asking for the moon. Richard and I had met through a mutual friend. We got married just 3 months later. He had just left a stable job to start his own business, and I, young and naive, threw myself into supporting him, managing everything at home so he could focus on his career. In the early years, he still remembered my birthday. When he came back from business trips, he'd bring small gifts, a silk scarf, a delicate watch. I'd always tuck them away carefully, thinking they were little symbols of our marriage, our partnership. But then nothing. It all just stopped, faded away like an old photograph. I opened Lucy's social media account. Emily had once shown me how to check a user's posts, thinking I'd enjoy seeing more pictures of Jack. I scrolled, photo after photo, video after video. Richard taking Lucy hiking in the mountains, their arms around each other, smiling at the camera. Richard picking apples with her on a farm, Jack laughing between them. Richard helping her with real estate paperwork, his arm casually on the back of her chair. Richard finding her an accountant to handle her taxes. Richard replacing her light bulbs. Richard driving her to her community dance classes. And the birthday videos, year after year, cakes, gifts, songs, family photos, with Richard in nearly every frame, beaming like the proud patriarch. If someone looked at those pictures without context, they'd think she was his wife, not me. I kept scrolling, punishing myself with every post, not even knowing how long I'd been at it. My eyes burned with dryness. My head ached with a dull, throbbing pain. I took off my reading glasses and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled, painful mess. The anger that had been boiling earlier had hollowed out. leaving only a heavy, aching pressure in my chest and throat. I could barely breathe. I had no more tears left to cry. All I could do was breathe in and out, trying to swallow the lump in my throat, but my chest felt like it had a hole torn right through it, and the cold just kept seeping in, wave after wave, until I couldn't stop shivering. I didn't know when I'd fallen asleep. May, oh dear, don't be upset. We promise we'll celebrate properly next year, okay? Please don't be sad anymore. We're sorry. I gently pushed her hand away and turned my gaze toward Brian, my voice quiet but clear. If you love Lucy so much, Brian, if she's so gracious and understanding, why don't you let her be your mother instead? Can you stop this insanity already, Mum? Do you even hear yourself? You sound ridiculous. You're being irrational. Richard barked. Enough, May. That's a vile thing to say. Lucy has been a good friend to this family, a comfort. You're twisting everything. It wasn't that he couldn't show emotion. He just never had any for me. Brian seemed taken aback by his father's outburst and fell silent for a moment. But I, strangely, felt calmer than ever. The rage, the humiliation, the hurt, all of it began to fade, coalesce into something quieter, something heavier. A kind of hollow, bone-deep exhaustion, a profound clarity. 40 years of marriage, decades of devotion, and in that moment, it all felt like nothing at all. A charade. I'm not crazy, Richard, and I'm not speaking nonsense. I'm speaking the truth, a truth you've all been too comfortable to acknowledge. I want a divorce. Divorce? Mom, are you out of your mind? At your age? You want to start throwing around the word divorce like it's some teenage game? You think you can just walk away from Dad and be fine? You think there's some man out there still waiting for someone like you, a 60-year-old housewife with no job, no skills, no prospects? You'll end up alone and penniless. Richard hadn't uttered a single word yet. He simply stood there, staring at me with a face frozen in disbelief that slowly morphed into dawning fury. But before he could react, Brian, my son, had already launched into a relentless barrage of insults and fear tactics, each word sharp and rapid fire, each designed to wound deeper than the last. It was as if he was trying to break me down with a well-rehearsed script of blame and condemnation. Had this been the old me, years ago, I might have crumbled under the onslaught. I might have internalized their accusations, questioned my own sanity as they so often claimed, labeling me irrational or hysterical. I might have shed tears of regret and whispered apologies for things I hadn't done wrong. But not anymore. Not now. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion, a deep, soul-weary tiredness mixed with a profound disgust that churned relentlessly inside me. I took a steady breath, summoning every ounce of calm and resolve left. The marital assets will be divided fairly, according to the law, I said evenly, my voice steady and clear. The children are grown, so custody is not an issue. I will have my lawyer draft the divorce agreement and send it to you, Richard. Richard's jaw clenched so tightly, his whole face seemed to knot with tension. His brows furrowed, carving deep lines that spoke of anger simmering just beneath the surface. But more than anger, what caught my attention was the unmistakable look of pure exasperation etched across his features. There was no pain in his eyes, no hint of sorrow or regret, only irritation, a cold, unfeeling annoyance. I realized then that I wasn't someone he mourned losing. I was a malfunctioning appliance, a problem to be dealt with reluctantly, not a partner to be loved or valued. I was an inconvenience, a burden, something he couldn't simply discard but wished he could. May, you're 60 years old. Don't you think this whole melodrama is a bit pathetic? You're a housewife, May. You have no income of your own. You haven't worked a day since we were married. What do you think you're going to live on? Goodwill? You'll lose. You'll crawl back. I suggest you calm down. I'm flying to Seattle this week for a business trip, an important conference. I won't be back for a few days. Hopefully, by the time I return, you'll have come to your senses and dropped this foolishness. We can discuss your grievances then, like adults. He grabbed his coat from the back of a chair and walked out without another word. Didn't even glance back. Didn't leave me a single moment to respond. and I didn't care to stop him. There was nothing left to say between us, only exhaustion, an dawning, terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. "Mom, I just don't get you. We sang happy birthday. We got you a cake. We apologized. We gave you a chance to move past everything, but no, you just had to keep pushing it, keep making things worse. Are you happy now? You made Dad leave. You're tearing this family apart." Back in the room, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I began to pack. Not everything, just essentials. After a quick round of sorting, I realized it was time to start planning for what came next. My hands were surprisingly steady. I picked up my phone and searched for a legal advice channel I'd been following, half-heartedly, for a few months. The host was a woman in her 40s, a lawyer named Claire, who specialized in helping women in difficult marital situations. Her advice was always clear, compassionate, and, most importantly, empowering. I'd stumbled upon her channel while scrolling through social media one day, feeling particularly invisible, and ever since, I'd often tuned in to listen, a tiny seed of what if planting itself in my mind. Following the steps Emily had once, ironically, taught me for something else, I wrote Claire an email, briefly outlining my situation. Then, steeling myself, I also called the law office, listed on her channel's homepage, and scheduled a consultation for the very next day. Then I went back to packing. As I folded clothes and sorted through trinkets, I looked around the room, the house I'd lived in for 40 years. Everything I truly owned, everything that was mine, and not just part of the household, could fit into one large suitcase and a small backpack. It was a sobering realization. I took the gold and silver jewelry Richard had given me over the years, the early birthday gifts, the anniversary tokens from a time that now felt like another life. I also took the household bank card, the one I'd always managed, always used to pay the bills, buy the groceries, budget down to the last cent. I planned to visit the bank later, before meeting Claire, and transfer the entire balance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than they imagined I had access to. Into the personal savings account I'd opened before marriage, an account Richard knew nothing about, an account I'd fed with hoarded grocery money, and the occasional secretarial job I did for a friend when Brian was small. My personal savings weren't much on their own, but combined with the household account, which I'd meticulously managed and saved from, it would be a start. I had handled every household expense for all these years, budgeting, saving, always with Brian in mind, for his education, for emergencies, for his future. Now, looking back, he probably never cared about that money, or where it came from. So, if that was the case, then I had every right to take it back, for myself, for my future. I rolled my suitcase out the door of the home I'd lived in for 4 decades, the home I had built and maintained, and took a cab to a modest, old-fashioned hotel downtown, a place I used to pass by in my younger days. It had always struck me as quiet and comforting, a haven. After checking in, a small, clean room with a view of a surprisingly green courtyard, I headed straight to the law office to meet Claire. She looked a bit surprised when she saw me, an ordinary-looking 60-year-old woman, probably expecting someone younger, more obviously downtrodden. But there was no judgment in her expression, no patronizing advice, no talk of thinking twice or trying to work it out. She listened, really listened, as I laid out my situation, the years of neglect, the recent betrayals, Richard's dismissive attitude, his belief that I was nothing without him. She took copious notes on every detail, her questions sharp and insightful. She offered clear, professional legal guidance, explaining my rights, the process, the potential challenges, and, crucially, the potential outcomes. I signed the engagement agreement on the spot and paid the retainer with a check drawn on my newly consolidated funds. It felt like the first truly powerful, independent act I had performed in decades. She scheduled a formal strategy session for the next day. As I stood up to leave, a wave of doubt, the old insecurities, washed over me. After some thought, I removed Richard, and only Richard, from my blocked list on my cell phone and sent him a single, concise message. "The divorce agreement has been sent to your office. Please sign it as soon as you receive it. Once the documents are finalized, let me know. We can go to the court together to file the paperwork, or our lawyers can handle it." He didn't respond. Not a word. I wasn't surprised. His silence was a tactic he'd used for years, a way to control, to punish, to make me concede. It wouldn't work anymore. Once everything was in place with Claire, and with her warm wishes for my new beginning, I began preparing to return to my hometown. My new life. The moment I stepped back into the old house where I'd grown up, the house my parents had left me, a house I hadn't visited in decades and had half-heartedly rented out, I was surprised by the profound sense of safety, of belonging, that washed over me. It was dusty, neglected, filled with ghosts of the past, but it was mine. I spent the entire next day cleaning it from top to bottom, airing out the rooms, clearing out the accumulated dust of years, and tossing away worn-out furniture that had no place in this new chapter of my life. The next morning, I took a cab to the nearest furniture store and, with a giddy sense of liberation, picked out some new pieces. A comfortable armchair, a small dining table, a new bed. Everything could now be delivered and installed right at home, so convenient that I didn't have to struggle at my age to drag heavy things piece by piece, as I would have in the past. When the delivery crew finished setting up and left, I looked around at the refreshed space, my space, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt a flicker of true, unadulterated hope for the life ahead. I'd been so busy for days, unpacking, organizing, rediscovering my old neighborhood, that I didn't expect the message when it finally came. From Richard. Just 2 words. Richard wrote when back. No hello, no how are you, no mention of the divorce papers. Just when back. Cold, detached, the same way he'd always been. That was how things had worked between us for 40 years. Every time we argued, every time I dared to voice a complaint, he would disappear emotionally, or sometimes physically for a few days on a business trip, then return, acting like nothing ever happened, calling it giving me time to cool down. Back. Then I, foolishly, thought that was how marriage worked. Someone had to yield, and it was always me. Whenever he casually resumed conversation, I took it as a sign of reconciliation and let everything slide, burying my hurt, my resentment, deeper and deeper. Looking back now, I realized how incredibly foolish, how utterly demeaning that pattern had been. I didn't bother explaining anything this time. I simply replied, "Contact me after you've signed the divorce papers. Or don't. My lawyer will be in touch if I don't hear from your counsel by Friday." Richard never responded to that message. I knew he still believed he could wear me down, the way he always had. With silence, with absence, with that chilling emotional distance that always made me feel like I was drowning. He believed I'd eventually give in, crawl back, like I always did. But I didn't. I wouldn't. I didn't care anymore. Instead, I turned my focus, all of it, toward my new life. I reached out to the local community center, the one Jenny had told me about, and with the help of a wonderfully kind staff member named Martha, I signed up for classes at the Senior Learning Program. Walking into that bright, spacious building, filled with the low hum of activity and laughter, I realized something I'd never truly understood before. Life, in the second half, doesn't have to be just kitchens, households, and endless compromise. It can also be filled with music, laughter, creativity, crafts, and discovery. I enrolled in a baking class, something I'd always loved but only ever did for others. I joined a choir group, my voice hesitant at first, then stronger. I signed up for an introductory English literature course. Finally, a chance to read the classics I'd only dreamed of. And, much to my own surprise, I even enrolled in a computer skills workshop, determined to conquer the technology that had once felt so intimidating. Mornings were spent in class, afternoons in hands-on practice or exploring the local library, and some evenings were spent chatting and gathering with new classmates, women and men with stories as varied and rich as my own. For the first time in my adult life, my days had a rhythm that I set, a purpose that I chose. And I was genuinely, deeply fulfilled. The kitchen and stove that had once trapped me in a cycle of repetition and thankless sacrifice began fading from my memory, piece by piece, replaced by the aroma of new recipes learned, the joy of shared songs, the thrill of new knowledge. I even started learning how to care for myself again. I tried on clothes I never would have dared to wear before, brighter colors, more flattering styles. I went to a local salon and got a modern perm, something fresh and playful, and felt a decade younger. I made friends, lots of them, a retired army vet with a wicked sense of humor from my baking class, a warm-spirited former teacher in the choir group who shared my love for old movies, and even my computer class instructor, a patient young man named Sam, who couldn't have been more than 30 but treated all his students with respect and kindness. One night, choir rehearsal ran later than usual, and by the time I got home, my little house feeling more like a sanctuary than ever, it was nearly 9 o'clock. As I walked up the short path to my front door, fumbling for my keys, I saw a figure leaning against the porch column, silhouetted by the streetlight. My heart lurched. It was Richard. He looked tired, worn out, and somehow smaller than I remembered. I glanced at him, a flicker of the old anxiety, then pushed it down. I said nothing, stepping past him to unlock my door. Once inside, I turned on the lights, poured myself a glass of warm water to soothe my throat from singing, before finally turning to face him. He'd followed me in, uninvited, and now stood awkwardly in my small living room, looking out of place. I truly thought that after our fierce argument that night, after my ultimatum, Richard would finally sign the divorce papers and be done with it, put it down to my irrationality and move on with Lucy. But to my surprise, a week later, just as Claire was preparing to file, his lawyer, Henderson, called hers. A meeting. Richard wanted to discuss terms. He still thought he could control the narrative, bully me into submission with a pittance. He still thought I was just a silly old woman playing at rebellion. He hadn't factored in Eleanor Vance. Richard looked like he was going to be sick. The arrogant, dismissive man I had known for 4 decades was gone. In his place was a frightened, cornered old man. And in that moment, I didn't feel triumph or even satisfaction, just a profound, weary sadness for all the wasted years, and a quiet, steely resolve to finally get what I was owed. He signed. Within 24 hours, he signed. He tried to haggle, of course, through Henderson, but Eleanor didn't budge an inch. He knew he was beaten. The little housewife he had dismissed and disparaged for so long had, with the help of a brilliant, formidable woman, brought his carefully constructed world crashing down. The divorce was finalized a month later. I didn't take everything, despite Eleanor's urging. I took what was fair, what would allow me to live comfortably and independently, and what would compensate for the years of deception. I took back my life. Soon after, I started my little baking channel online, just as I'd dreamed. Grandma May's Kitchen. I wasn't fancy. My videos were a bit shaky at first, but people seemed drawn to the charm of an older woman sharing her cherished family recipes. Recipes I was now reclaiming as my own. My age, my story, which I hinted at subtly, and my genuine love for baking gave me a small but loyal following. My circle of friends expanded, from my fellow retirees at the community center to a surprising number of younger people, men and women, who loved to learn from me, and who, more importantly, listened to me and valued my experiences. Eventually, through the grapevine, which in a small town, even one I'd returned to after decades, is surprisingly efficient, I heard that Richard and Lucy had finally, officially, gotten together after my divorce. But things, apparently, didn't go the way they'd expected, or perhaps the way Richard had expected. Lucy, it turned out, had no talent or inclination for housekeeping. She couldn't manage the household finances, which were now considerably smaller. Instead of her easing into the role of supportive partner, the family, or what was left of it, ended up having to adjust around her needs, her social schedule, her expensive tastes. She tried helping with Jack, but apparently she was careless and ended up giving him food that triggered a serious allergic reaction, one that landed him in the hospital for several days. After that incident, Brian, finally seeing the reality of the situation, packed up and moved out with Emily and Jack for good, putting considerable distance between themselves and Richard and Lucy. Not long after that, maybe a year into his new life with Lucy, Richard was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. He underwent surgery and was confined to bed during a long, painful recovery. And soon after his diagnosis, almost predictably, Lucy filed for divorce from him, taking a hefty chunk of his remaining assets with her when she left. The loyal, grieving widow needed a caretaker, not a patient. Now Richard is recovering alone in that big, empty house. Emily, I heard, in order to care for him and Jack, and to make ends meet after Brian's business took a hit, left her job and became a full-time homemaker, the very role she had once subtly judged me for. She still sends me occasional messages, casual updates, bits of conversation, perhaps seeking some form of absolution I cannot give. When she told me she had quit her job, I said just one thing. I don't judge the choices you're making now, Emily, but if you ever want to start over, remember, it's never too late. Yes, it wasn't until I turned 60, until I faced the ultimate betrayal, that I finally learned to love myself, to value myself. And only then, only when I stood up and fought for myself, did I truly begin living the life I had postponed, denied myself, for 40 long years. He said I'd lose because I was just a housewife. He underestimated the strength of a woman who finally had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. And he certainly didn't count on Eleanor Vance. But most of all, he didn't count on me, finally finding my own voice and my own power. And that, my dears, is a recipe for a life well lived.